The Alien franchise has made an indelible mark on film history and future, but with prequels and sequels expanding the original story over a span of several decades, it can be hard to untangle what's really going on here. What's the Alien movie saga really about? Let's explore. The Alien movie story begins when a proto-human on Earth drinks a deadly poison that kills him and dissolves his body into strands of human DNA, which is then dosed into the water supply. Several million years later, Dr. Elizabeth Shaw believes she has found a map and an invitation to the planet where these proto-humans originated.
I think they want us to come and find them.
She calls them engineers, and she wrongly assumes they want to meet their children. Shaw and a scientific crew are hired by the Weyland Corporation to find the engineers on planet LV-223, and after a great deal of trouble, they arrive. But the engineers are all dead. Their spacecraft is filled with jars of toxic black goo, corresponding to egg-like sacs that begin to open when signs of life appear. Yes, Dr. Shaw finds her engineers, a lifelong passion bordering on obsession. But what she didn't expect to find was that the engineers had set a course to Earth with the intention of wiping out the human race they had created. The engineers never had their chance, as they themselves were wiped out by an ever-evolving neomorph, the predecessor to the xenomorph seen later in the series. Megalomaniacal android Dave decides to take up the engineer's mantle and infect the human crew.
Big things have small beginnings.
After chaos, destruction, and an encounter with a revived engineer who proves his hostility toward humans, David and Dr. Shaw escape to the engineer's home. Shaw's new obsession is understanding why the engineers plan to kill all the humans. Was greed one of the human foibles that led the engineers to want to eliminate us? It's Peter Weyland's greedy obsession for immortality that drives him to create the android David, who eventually surpasses his maker and winds up creating the xenomorph as we know it. Did the engineers know or come to suspect that human behavior would be the universe's eventual destruction? All signs point to yes. Dr. Shaw never actually makes it to the engineer's home planet, which she and David have been calling Paradise. Instead, David kills her and drops the black goo on the thriving planet. He cultivates xenomorph eggs and sends out a welcoming signal to try and attract new life forms to what is now his planet. The Covenant is a colonizer craft set out for one of the few remaining known habitable planets in the universe, Aragi 6, along with an entire ecosystem on board. The Covenant crew is awakened from hypersleep years early, and on a hunch, they divert from their course to check out the signal coming from the unnamed planet.
A human being out there where there can't be any humans. A hidden planet that turns up out of nowhere and just happens to be perfect for us. It's too good to be true.
So much of the Alien story is based on humans terraforming faraway planets because the Earth was either becoming or already was uninhabitable. Thanks to climate change and war, the privileged few humans who could escape our planet did, and with apparent gusto. It didn't seem to bother them that they would spend decades of their lives in hypersleep to get to these planets and start rebuilding. Without these humans looking for new places to colonize, the xenomorph would never have found its perfect host to propagate its own species, with a little help from David. David has been engineering a new form of the xenomorph, a perfect organism that he can finally test on human subjects. With the crew on board the Covenant is Walter, the newest model android, whose senses his counterpart is up to no good. When David finds out Covenant has an entire colony of hundreds of humans, it's a battle to stop him before he commandeers the ship for his own purposes. When he does, we start to realize why the engineers wanted to destroy their human creation. Like their ancestors, humans also decided to play God and created synthetic life in their own image. David's God complex mirrors his creator Weyland's, and now David has created a monster. In the alien vision of the future, android technology mirrors human emotional development. David and Walter are different models of clone androids in Prometheus and Covenant, designed by Peter Weyland for different means to different ends. David was a special creation, made to match Weyland's great intelligence and one day surpass it.
He is the closest thing to a son I will ever have. Unfortunately, he is not human. He will never grow old, and he will never die.
Walter was created to be a faithful companion to its human counterpart, a protector and source of support. As Alien begins, it's been 16 years since we left David and the spaceship Covenant. A salvaging team on the ship Nostromo answers a distress call on planet LV-426, even though they aren't equipped for a rescue mission. A hair second too late, Ellen Ripley figures out the distress call is actually a warning, but one of her crew, Kane, has already been infected by a xenomorph facehugger. Breaking quarantine protocols, Kane is allowed back on board, where the alien hatches and wreaks bloody havoc. Ash, a crew member who's secretly an android, receives a communique from people at the company, who want him to bring the creature back alive no matter the human cost. Here, the android Ash is nowhere near as sophisticated as either David or Walter, presumably because these droids ended up being dangerously advanced. But Ash was also a danger to humans, especially once he got his marching orders to bring the xenomorph back alive. Disobeying orders, Ripley and her crew hunt the monster and eventually kill it. As one of the most memorable survivors put to screen, Ripley strikes a perfect balance between strength and vulnerability, as well as professionalism and competence. Even though she is met with disbelief when she first discusses the reality of the xenomorph, she refuses to be gaslighted. Ripley and the cat Jones are the only survivors who end this portion of the alien saga, tucked safely in hypersleep, waiting to be found by another ship. Interestingly, Jones was an excellent first alert system, since it tried to warn multiple people about the presence of the alien on board the Nostromo. And like Ripley, nobody listened to him at first. But Jones would go on to survive the series longer than any other human character outside of our well-known heroine. You'd think that when one of the deadliest and most virulent creatures to ever exist surfaces, the logical thing to do would be to exterminate it, especially if it has the power to destroy every planet it touches. But because of corporate greed, opportunistic humans attempt to capitalize financially off the creature at the expense of other humans with less powerful positions.
You sent them out there and you didn't even warn them. Why didn't you warn them, Burke?
The arrogance of man we see throughout the series is a scathing indictment of an obsession with violence and killing. There are few women in much of the Alien saga, but it's the women who ultimately fight against these deadly obsessions. At the start of Aliens, Ripley has drifted in hypersleep for 57 years before she's awakened and ends up on the military vessel Sulaco. Unfortunately, the Sulaco is under instruction to return to LV-426, where Hadley's Hope, a human colony, has suddenly stopped responding to all communication. Ripley is in severe post-traumatic stress, which turns into grief when she finds out her daughter died on Earth while she was in hypersleep. Worse still, her claims about the alien monster with acid for blood aren't taken seriously enough to stop the mission.
Because if one of those things gets down here, then that will be all. Then all this bullshit you think is so important, you can just kiss all that goodbye.
On LV-426, the Sulaco crew and Ripley search the seemingly abandoned colony and find a new xenomorph nest. The eggs have already hatched and use the entire colony as incubators, with the exception of one survivor, a young girl named Newt. Newt is the same age Ripley's daughter was when she first left Earth, so Ripley is immediately protective of her. Once the Sulaco's military crew realize the xenomorph threat is as horrific as Ripley insisted, they try to escape. But as in Alien, once again corporate and military greed leads to sabotage. This time from Burke, who's determined to preserve a xenomorph specimen. He and the creature are both defeated, and Ripley survives, joined by Newt, Jones the cat, Corporal Hicks, and the torso of Android Bishop, who proves to be a portrait of empathy, one in which we can see shades of earlier Walter. The reveal that Ripley's daughter has died becomes key to her character. It explains why she's so protective of the women in her orbit going forward, especially young girls. Even by the time she's hybrid Ripley in Resurrection, she has a fierce maternal side, showed in the way she shields the android call, as well as a continued deep distrust of the company men. When hybrid Ripley has an alien baby who imprints on her, she is horrified and disgusted by the monster, but at the same time feels that connection and weeps openly when she has to kill it. Shortly after Ripley enters hypersleep on the Sulaco, a fire breaks out, killing everyone else on board and shooting her pod into space. It lands on penal colony Fiorina 161. But the Sulaco shuttle also crashes. But Ripley isn't the sole survivor. A xenomorph had also made it and had impregnated her before ejecting her onto Fiorina 161. The penal colony has essentially been abandoned by the people who created it, the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, until they find out there's a live xenomorph on board and that Ripley is carrying an alien fetus in her chest.
The company knows everything that happened on the ship. It all goes into the computer and gets sent back to network.
Because it is a prison planet run by convicts, there are no weapons to fight the monster other than a steel forge that hasn't been used in decades. Ripley and the prisoners still finally manage to kill the loose xenomorph, again at huge human cost. When Weyland-Yutani emissaries arrive, they're headed by Michael Bishop, the human template for the android Bishop. But Ripley knows better than to trust company men by now, and she throws herself into a pit of molten steel so nobody can try to weaponize the alien monster within her. Ripley's already sacrificed so much in fighting this creature. Here, she gives up the last thing she has left. Because humans can't seem to leave well enough alone when it comes to universe-destroying acid-blooded creatures, Alien Resurrection continues the story 200 years later, when the United Systems military is still trying to recreate a functioning xenomorph aboard the USS Auriga. Using Ripley's melded human and alien DNA recovered from Fiorina 161, new crops of military scientists tinker with her code to clone the xenomorph. They've engineered a hybrid version of Ripley who has green nails, acid blood, and vague memories from the original Ripley who died centuries before. The scientists have also finally created a working xenomorph, but like Ripley, it's not the same creature it once was. It's world smarter and understands English.
So, we're a fast learner.
A salvage team from the ship Betty boards the Auriga with human cargo that will be used to create more monsters for military might. A new android, Cool, is on her own mission to kill the hybrid Ripley before she can give the military the queen that was gestating in her chest. She fails her mission, but Cool's role here is also to show how android progression in the series has reached near human status, with a machine who's more human than inhuman. Ripley attempts to kill the queen before she gives birth, but is also too late. However, the queen doesn't give birth to eggs as the past queens have. Instead, it gives birth to a fully formed alien with many of Ripley's features. The huge baby alien kills the queen, thinking Ripley is his actual mother, and Ripley is forced to kill her baby while the Auriga crashes into Earth. Ripley finally makes it back to our home planet. Sort of.
I'm a stranger here myself.
Long before the Alien prequels introduced a neomorph, the creature evolved over the course of each original film, both in physicality and intelligence. While its evolution is confusing at first, by Alien Covenant we learn David is the father of the xenomorph as we know it from Alien and beyond. The black ooze cultivated by the engineers was a biological weapon with the ability to mutate its host, hence why we see several different versions of the monster over the course of Prometheus and Alien Covenant. The xenomorph is a perfect killing machine, and one of the sad lessons never learned by humans was to leave the thing alone. It cannot be tamed, it can only be killed, and even that proves an almost impossible feat for hundreds of years. Even though hybrid Ripley appears to kill the last of the xenomorphs, who knows whether they have persisted on another planet out in the universe, waiting for a meat sack to arrive and play host.
After seeing Alien Covenant, you probably have some questions. That's okay. Like Prometheus before it, Alien Covenant was long on terror and short on answers. As such, we're here to do our best to get to the bottom of some of these mysteries and try to figure out just what the takeaway is from Ridley Scott's latest extraterrestrial murder fest. So now, with the very obvious spoiler warning, let's try to explain the ending of Alien Covenant. Why did David help Daniels in Tennessee? If you were surprised when the synthetic at the end of the movie turned out to be the evil British David and not the kind, bland Walter, then you haven't seen a lot of movies, have you? The minute you see Michael Fassbender playing two robots, one good, one evil, you have to know that the bad one's gonna pull the old dipsy-doo switcheroo on our heroes by the end of the movie. It's basically movie law. However, even if the David reveal was somewhat predictable, it does raise the question. Why did David help Daniels in Tennessee during the final showdown with the xenomorph? It's not completely clear, but it seems likely that David suffered from a planet-sized case of hubris. His whole plan seems to center around finding ways to make the xenomorph better through experimentation. We got a glimpse of some of his trials and errors when we saw his lab, along with what remained of Elizabeth Shaw from Prometheus. It's possible that the final showdown aboard the Covenant was, for David, a test to see whether this version of the xenomorph could get the better of Daniels in Tennessee. It failed, so he's got plans for bigger, badder aliens when the ship finally arrives at Origin 6. On the other hand, maybe he simply saw something in Daniels that he wanted to preserve. Again, so he could use her in his future experiments. Who's Mommy? At one point, David says that his alien pals are waiting for Mother. There are plenty of ways to interpret this line. A pretty obvious reading is that the alien eggs, and more specifically, the facehuggers within, need a host to do the bloody and nasty with. In essence, anyone who provides an incubation chamber for a xenomorph is Mother. But what if there's more to it than that? Prometheus and Alien Covenant are prequels to the original Alien franchise, and that includes Aliens, which was written and directed by James Cameron. In that movie, we learn the source of all those lovely alien eggs, the alien queen. Since we didn't get to see anything resembling a xenomorph queen before leaving the engineer's planet, it's likely that it hasn't been created yet. David can't stay up forever making new eggs, so the queen's creation has to be on David's agenda. And that may spell a pretty bad morning for our hero Daniels when she wakes up. What did it all mean? It may be tough to decipher, but it sure seems like Ridley Scott was trying to tell us something with this tale of space colonization gone horribly awry. Well, let's think about this. Daniels and her poor, dead husband Jacob came aboard the Covenant with hopes of starting a new life on a new planet, just because it's an adventure. Meanwhile, poor, dead Captain Christopher decided to stop on the Engineers' planet in response to the weird communication they picked up, and to see if this new world might be even better than the one they'd been going towards already. And David decided that he should play God and outcreate his creators. What was the result of all these decisions? Chaos, destruction, and death. More than anything, Alien Covenant is about the dangers of unchecked human ambition. If Daniels and her fella had just stayed on Earth and rented a nice apartment somewhere, he probably wouldn't have been burnt to a crisp in a hypersync pod. And if Christopher hadn't diverted away from Origin 6, well then we'd have a movie about the dangers of micromanaging a group of drunk spaceship workers. But there probably would have been far fewer blood barfs and body bursts. And if David hadn't decided to go full-on supervillain, well, then he wouldn't have inadvertently became that which he despised. What happens next? 2 months before Alien Covenant's May 2017 release, the Sydney Morning Herald reported on a set visit with director Ridley Scott. In that article, Scott revealed that he's already got the next movie in the prequel series written and ready to go. That means that the dangling plot threads of what'll happen when the Covenant arrives at Origin 6 will be answered in whatever treatment Scott's got locked in his desk drawer. Presumably, we'll see a whole mess of xenomorphs bursting out of colonists, not to mention a final showdown with David and Daniels, or whoever else signs on for a sequel if and when 20th Century Fox announces it's happening. What happens when the prequels are over? Not only has Scott got the sequel to Covenant ready to go, The Hollywood Reporter said that Scott's revealed plans to make yet another movie in this prequel series. That fourth movie would apparently link up with the events of the first Alien movie from 1979. And then, no more Alien movies ever, right? Well, the entire reason we're talking about new Alien movies right now at all is that franchises tend to go for as long as people can earn money from them. Whatever your opinion on the current crop of Alien flicks, making new movies and a recognizable series of movies is a sure way to earn cash. So even though these prequels will have to lead into the original movies somehow, there will likely be some effort to keep the brand alive. That means sequels that pick up after the events of Alien Resurrection, or, God help us, Alien vs. Predator. It might also mean that we're only a few short years away from Alien Reboot. Don't say it can never happen. Hollywood rebooted RoboCop, Spider-Man, Evil Dead, and plenty more. There's no reason that Alien won't be reborn soon enough too. After all, getting born and reborn is kind of what aliens do.
Alien Covenant promised to explore the mysterious and goopy lineage of the xenomorph species that we all know and love. But in many cases, it just left the entire Alien franchise open to even more questions. Let's burrow into Covenant, stick our ovipositors down its throat, and see how many answers are still waiting to hatch. And of course, spoilers are hatching beyond this point, so cover your face, okay? Who are the engineers? More than anything else, Covenant needed to explain just what the heck its prequel Prometheus was all about. Prometheus introduced us to the engineers, an alien race who inexplicably started life on Earth. We don't know exactly why, and that's what the crew of the Prometheus sets out to discover.
What we hoped to achieve was to meet our makers, to get answers. Why they even made us in the first place.
However, once the android David actually finds the engineers and all of the answers are within reach, he slimes them. An entire city of engineers is destroyed by David's stock of evil black goo. We never learn who the engineers are, why they do what they do, or where they came from. And thanks to David, we may never know. Why did David kill the engineers? The motivations of the Covenant's human crew are pretty straightforward. Just don't die. However, the Alien franchise's androids tend to be a little harder to read, and none are more confusing than David. It becomes clear in both Prometheus and the introduction to Covenant that David sees himself as superior to humans, and even expresses the bizarre idea that all creations want to kill their creators.
Kill all humans. Must kill all humans.
Sure, you might be mad at Mom for not letting you borrow the car on a school night, but that's pretty much the extent of matricidal rage that most people reach. So why exactly does David wipe out the engineers? It's possible that, as mankind's implied creators, David is just taking his murder plot one step deeper into his ancestry. But there isn't a whole lot of meaning there. And he definitely doesn't do it to protect Earth from the engineers. So what's the deal? What did the goo do? When we meet David again in Covenant, he leads the crew into the derelict city of the engineers, through masses of their dead bodies. Of course, they're all dead thanks to David's goo, but what exactly did this goo do? As far as anyone can tell, it mutates any living animal it comes into contact with, but we never find out what it did to the engineers. If the goo did what goo usually does, the entire engineer planet would be swarming with xenomorphs. So where did all those potential xenomorphs end up after 10 years? What happened in the 5 minutes after the goo drop? Why was the engineer's planet lifeless? The planet that the Covenant lands on is ideal for life, but inexplicably, the crew can't seem to find any. No birds, no bugs, just silence. As David tells his guests, the virus he dispersed was made to seek out hosts, so all of the meat on the planet became an immediate target as soon as he dropped his payload. But none of the morphs that would have resulted from his attack seem to still be around. Nothing is. Ultimately, trying to comprehend what goo can and cannot do is a job best left for Ridley Scott's pulsating nightmares. But that mysterious decade where David was left to his own messed up devices leaves too many mysteries for the continuity concerned. For now, let's just say it was predators. What's up with those spores? The crew of the Covenant gets their first taste of alien madness when a couple of dinguses brush against some plants, suck in some alien dust, and after a little while have monsters bursting out of their giblets. It's basic science. Except human DNA and engineered DNA are allegedly nearly identical. It wouldn't make much biological sense if the engineer's planet was rife with a virulent strain of murder monster mushrooms. So these balls of alien death confetti must not have always been there. Instead, they must have been caused by David's use of the goo. The goo can mutate every animal it comes in contact with, so why did it very selectively choose one plant to turn into a vehicle for the species? Arguably, it's not a plant at all that shoots out those spores. But that still leaves questions. Were these pods part of David's later experiments? And if so, why are facehuggers treated as a superior form of alien evolution? The spore's method of propagating the species is only 1,000,000 times more efficient than the alien egg pods. The choice is simple. Your species propagates because an idiot actively agitates a giant ugly egg and waits for its terrifying contents to attack and shove an egg tube down their throat. Or your species lives on because something gently brushes against a small pod with their toe. The more efficient method is clear. So what makes the eggs more evolutionary sound than the spores? Is David the xenomorph whisperer? It's easy to argue that aliens aren't overly interested in androids because they don't really have a lot of delicious edible parts. So if you're a synthetic being, you pretty much get a xenomorph hall pass. But why are the xenomorphs David is cultivating strangely loyal to him? At the very least, they seem to see him as one of the only living things that's not worth immediately killing, which is really saying something when you're an animal designed only for killing. We know xenomorphs don't imprint on the first thing they see like many Earth animals, so how does David automatically have this dominion over the beasts? Maybe we'll learn the answer in a sequel. And while we're on the subject of synthetics, is Walter still alive? Alien is a franchise that relishes showing the audience every gory detail of nearly every bloody death. So when someone dies and you don't at least see their viscera-strewn corpse, you know something might be up. During the first phase of the big fight between David and Walter, we see that Walter has the ability to heal himself. While he takes a few minutes to reboot, it seems like he can recover from some pretty deep cuts.
Now stand aside, worthy adversary.
'Tis but a scratch.
A scratch? Your arm's off!
No, it isn't.
After the second phase of their big battle, we learn that David comes out on top and switches places with Walter. We never learn Walter's fate, but when even an earlier android model like David can survive decapitation, we can assume that Walter is still alive. Or can we? Dun dun dun! Everyone knows that you can't keep a good droid down. Ridley Scott's Alien is a sci-fi horror classic, a crazy cocktail of influences that somehow manages to be more frightening than the sum of its parts. Everybody who worked on it had their own idea of what Alien would be about. Perhaps that's why scholars, sci-fi nerds, and film critics alike continue to discover creepy, unexplored channels within this terrifying masterpiece. So now, let's take a look at the story behind Alien. Dark Star. If you could trace the origin of Alien back to one single point, it would have to be Dan O'Bannon's 1974 sci-fi comedy Dark Star. While attending USC, O'Bannon made a 7-minute horror suspense short film called Bloodbath. The project caught the attention of a young John Carpenter, also a student, and the two set out to make a science fiction movie for John Carpenter's master's thesis. They called their finished movie Dark Star, and it wasn't very good. It did have an alien in it, but unfortunately, that alien was a beach ball with feet. According to O'Bannon, instead of the most impressive student film ever made, we had the least impressive professional film ever made. But that crappy film gave birth to a legend.
A couple of years down the line, I decided to do Dark Star as a horror movie instead of a comedy. And that was the germ of Alien.
Not many people saw Dark Star, but future Alien director Ridley Scott did, along with visionary Chilean-French filmmaker Alejandro Jodorowsky, and it left a lasting impression. Dune connections. Jodorowsky was so impressed with Dark Star that he hired O'Bannon to help him adapt Frank Herbert's space opera Dune for the big screen. The project ultimately tanked, but Alien was one of the many successful projects that rose from the ashes of Jodorowsky's ill-fated attempt. O'Bannon moved to Paris to work on Dune, which is where he met artist Christopher Foss, who'd later do design work for Alien, as well as future Alien designer H.R. Giger. Jodorowsky's philosophy of art design also heavily influenced O'Bannon's work on Alien. He would find his, quote, spiritual warriors and then put them together in one big room to work out a movie structure. Later, O'Bannon would use the same strategy to brainstorm about Alien, bringing together Foss, Giger, and cartoonists Mobius and Ron Cobb to hash out the design for their little sci-fi horror project. Script struggles. Ultimately, Brandywine Productions agreed to produce the film for 20th Century Fox, with Ridley Scott in the director's chair, but the Nostromo still had some turbulence ahead. According to O'Bannon, producers David Giller and Walter Hill wanted to completely redo his script. So that's exactly what they did. According to Geiler, he and Hill added the feminist elements everyone is talking about. We gave the characters texture, functions. In O'Bannon's draft, they were totally different, military types, all men. We changed all the dialogue, every word of it. O'Bannon's original screenplay featured the xenomorph and the wrecked ship, and that's about where the similarities to the finished film end. Hill's and Geiler's rewrites added Ripley and Dallas and the rest of the gang. Not to mention the whole vast corporate conspiracy subplot and the entire concept for human-looking androids, an idea that was already an Alien cornerstone by the first sequel. But bizarrely, some drafts also had a time travel-based plotline featuring Jack the Ripper, Hercules, and Genghis Khan, like a magic treehouse book with murderous chest-bursting aliens. Then there's the alien that, against all odds, Scott and his team somehow made despite all the confusion. As artist Christopher Foss put it to Den of Geek, poor old Dan O'Bannon, the bloke whose concept it was, just got absolutely shafted. I kind of got the impression that Ridley was quietly going his own way, trying to get on with it and get it done. Ship shape. The Nostromo, the dark, claustrophobic spaceship where all the alien action takes place, is practically another character in the movie, and Chris Foss and Ron Cobb were essential to the creation of the vessel. But the final result didn't come right away. The team worked on the design for 5 whole months. Pretty much the whole time the producers were trying to find a director for the movie, and some of those designs got weird. Foss had endless spaceship designs suggesting submarines, diesel locomotives, Mayan interceptors, Mississippi riverboats, and jumbo space arcs. But in the end, they were simply too outlandish for the producers to get on board. The Nostromo's final design came from one of Rob Cobb's simpler sketches, and even then, Ridley Scott made the ship's modeler get rid of Cobb's original yellow color scheme in favor of the flat gray that made it into the film. Casting chaos. Before Sigourney Weaver got the part of Ripley, none other than Meryl Streep was on the short list of candidates to be offered the role. Streep is, of course, ridiculously talented, and Alien probably would have been just fine with her in the lead role, but fate intervened. In 1978, Streep's romantic partner, actor John Cazale, passed away, and nobody felt comfortable interrupting her mourning to make the offer. As it turns out, Ripley wasn't even Sigourney Weaver's first choice. She said in an interview, "Actually, the part I wanted to play was Lambert, Veronica Cartwright's part. In the first script I read, Lambert just cracked jokes the whole time. That's the character I could identify with." And while Weaver wanted the part of Lambert, Veronica Cartwright was dead set on playing Ripley. It was only just before shooting began that Cartwright was told their roles had been switched.
I get a call, and they said, okay, you need to come in for your wardrobe for Lambert. And I said, oh no, I'm not Lambert, I'm Ripley. No, you're Lambert.
Obviously, the decisions all worked out in the end, but it's interesting to consider how close we were to getting a completely different movie. Silly scenes. Ridley Scott worked hard to preserve the less is more aesthetic that made Alien so terrifying, and that meant cutting a lot of scenes from the final film. Some of the biggest cuts were made because they looked kinda stupid. For example, Lambert's death is haunting because most of it is implied and off-screen. The camera cuts away just before the alien gets her, so we don't actually see what happens. But her death was filmed, it just looked way too cheesy. By the same token, Brett's death in the final film is terrifying, but the extended cut of that scene is borderline absurd.
Hey, I'm not gonna hurt you.
Academic legacy. For a sci-fi horror creature feature, Alien gets a surprising amount of love in the academic world. Case in point, June 2017 saw the publication of a book called Alien and Philosophy, a collection of essays on all things alien. It's heady stuff, but it just goes to show there's more to the xenomorph than a facehugger, a chest burster, and a man in a crocodile suit. If the grotesque imagery, state-of-the-art special effects, and a storied production aren't enough to build a compelling film theory thesis, then maybe all those Freudian themes will do the trick. Maybe Alien Covenant wasn't quite the Alien movie all the fans have been dying for, but it came pretty close. It had lots of aliens, right? As a bridge between Prometheus and the greater Alien universe, Covenant bore a heavy burden for fans of the franchise, and it took that burden seriously. Love it or hate it, we got an official backstory for the xenomorphs and the promise of more mythology to come. What we also got was a ton of Easter eggs pointing back to earlier Alien films. Here's a look, but be careful, some of these eggs could have some pretty nasty content lurking inside. Like spoilers! The bird. Die-hard fans were probably looking for this little guy the whole movie, and they weren't disappointed. This little drinking bird thing has been in a few of the Alien movies. The first time you see it is the opening shot of Alien, which has two of them alone on the Nostromo's eating table. It shows up a few times throughout the movie, particularly the scene where Kane takes an alien to the chest. The same bird shows up again in Aliens, and then again in the game Alien Isolation. And now it's back again in Alien Covenant. Why? Who knows? But at this point, the bird has been in the franchise longer than Sigourney Weaver. The hidden trailer. Even before Covenant hit theaters, the marketing team was already throwing out some Easter eggs. One of those landed in the form of a brand new teaser that featured this hashtag. Plug that into Instagram and you would have found an Instagram account with the same name and only one post. A hidden trailer for Alien Covenant, set to the tune of John Denver's Take Me Home, Country Roads, which Elizabeth Shaw was singing in a transmission in the movie. That's also the hashtag spelled backwards, Take Me Home. Terrible food. About 1 million people tuned in to the extended pre-release clip Last Supper on YouTube. In hindsight, releasing that scene was a beautiful marketing move, since it's not even in the movie. It's like an extra 5 minutes of movie for all of us who have been carefully waiting for each new Covenant teaser. And while that's kind of an Easter egg in itself, we like to dig deeper. The entire scene is set up almost exactly like the scene in Alien, right before the first chest burster pops out of Kane. Even the angle of the shot is almost identical. That's certainly not a coincidence, since these are both Ridley Scott films. Then Upworth, played by Callie Hernandez, starts choking in the Last Supper clip, and Danny McBride's Tennessee makes this joke.
Hey, the food's not that bad.
Which is almost exactly what Parker said to Kane when he starts choking in the original movie.
What's the matter? The food ain't that bad, baby.
If there's one thing we've learned by now, it's that when it comes to space, you should probably pack your own lunch. David and Walter. Michael Fassbender plays two parts in Alien Covenant, a reprisal of his David 8 role from Prometheus, and Walter, an updated version of David that launched with the crew of the Covenant. But for the longest time, the androids in the Alien franchise seem to be following a Sesame Street naming pattern. Ash, Bishop, Cole, David, they all went in alphabetical order, until Walter. Not Eduardo, like we all expected, but Walter. Well, one fan theory behind that name choice is as simple as it is logical. Both of those names are callbacks to David Giler and Walter Hill, two producers who have been a part of Alien since the very first film. Is it true? It'd be an awesome tribute if it was. After all, these were the guys who rewrote Dan O'Bannon's original script and basically made the original sci-fi horror classic we know and love, Mother's Day. Ah, Mother, that disembodied voice that controlled everything on the ship in Alien. Sometimes we dream about her counting down the Nostromo's destruction.
In T-minus 5 minutes.
While Mother bit the big one when the Nostromo exploded, she's definitely back in prequel form.
Mother, how long have we been traveling?
Approximately 24 days.
Is it the same operating system that shows up later in film continuity in Alien? Alien Covenant takes place about 20 years before Alien. If so, Mother can't be very smart, because she should have totally seen the events of Alien coming after everything that happened in Covenant. Beer Fest. Fun fact, astronauts love getting drunk.
It begins! Give me that! Stop it!
In Alien, the crew kicks back with cans of Aspen beer, a brew generously provided by the company that wants to kill them all, Weyland-Yutani. In Alien Covenant, that beer is apparently already part of the rations, because the crew of the Covenant drinks the exact same beer. That's a cool, refreshing, frost-brewed throwback to the film that launched the franchise. Paradise Found. Back when names were still being tossed around for Prometheus 2, one of the working titles was Paradise Lost, a reference to John Milton's 17th century poem about Satan's temptation of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Alien Covenant's name obviously changed in the interim, but one of the lines in the movie still alludes to Milton's poem. When David is fighting Walter, David asks, "Would you rather serve in heaven or reign in hell?" In the context of the movie, he's basically saying, quit being a sucky robot and kill everything with me. But the line itself refers back to Book 1 of Milton's poem, when Lucifer says, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, right after he gets tossed out of God's clubhouse. Writing on the wall. Let's talk facehuggers. Prometheus had none, but we all knew going into Alien Covenant that those little bastards would be back in action, since Billy Crudup's character Christopher took one to the face in the trailer. But the question during the movie wasn't if they'd show up, but when. And if you were paying attention, that moment was basically spelled out right on the wall of David's little alien chop shop. Right before David leads Christopher down into the room where all the eggs are waiting, they walk through a doorway with a hand-drawn diagram of a facehugger stuck to the wall right beside it. It was easy to miss. There were diagrams plastered all over the walls, but if you noticed it, it was pretty much a neon sign foreshadowing Christopher's impending chest-bursty death. We missed you, you gross little cuties.
You know her as Elizabeth Shaw, the intrepid scientist who makes a brief appearance in Ridley Scott's Alien Covenant after starring in its predecessor Prometheus. But the woman who plays her, Swedish actress Noomi Rapace, has been heating up Hollywood since her breakout in 2009. Here are all the places you've seen her before. The Millennium Trilogy. Thanks to director David Fincher and a $90 million Hollywood budget, you've probably heard of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and its titular protagonist, the brooding, tattooed Lisbeth Salander. But 2 years before Rooney Mara earned an Oscar nomination for playing Stieg Larsson's heroine, Noomi Rapace played the role to great acclaim in her native Sweden. In fact, it's unlikely that Lisbeth Salander would have ever gotten a big-budget outing in mainstream Hollywood if the Swedish actress hadn't turned in such a stunner of a performance first. While The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is pretty much a household name, Stieg Larsson's Millennium book series was actually adapted as a trilogy. Noomi Rapace reprised her role as Lisbeth Salander in 2 more movies, The Girl Who Played with Fire and The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest. All told, Rapace spent a full year playing Lisbeth, a performance that resulted in 3 feature films, 6 television episodes worth of raw material, and rave reviews across the board. However, once she was done, she was really done. In an interview with NPR, the actress said, quote, "It was kind of strange. You know, the last day, after we filmed the last scene, all the producers came with champagne and everybody wanted to celebrate. And I just said, I need to go to the bathroom, and I just started to throw up. It was like my body was physically throwing Lisbeth out." End quote. The Monitor. Compared to Rapaz's work in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the Swedish horror film The Monitor was pretty low profile, except in Sweden. But fans of the genre will recognize it, and more importantly, its leading lady for her pitch-perfect performance as a woman on the brink of insanity. The Monitor is an understated slow burner featuring the creepiest home appliance ever, the baby monitor. Rapaz is memorable as a traumatized single mother who just wants to listen to her kid while he sleeps, but gets an earful of something sinister instead. Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows. For those who hadn't already discovered Noomi Rapace via the Dragon Tattoo trilogy, there was no missing her in her big-budget debut alongside Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law. Rapace played Madame Simza in Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows, channeling her trademark ferocity into the role of a Romani gypsy woman who gets caught up in a deadly conspiracy, spearheaded by Sherlock's arch-nemesis Moriarty. And her performance is doubly impressive because she had to cross a huge language barrier to do it. Rapace revealed in an interview, quote, "I didn't speak English like 3 years ago, and for me to find a way to be free and be able to live in this language, instead of feeling like you're stuck in this prison of control where you can do perfect lines but you can't improvise and you can't ad-lib, after a week I'd forgotten about it. It's the way they work. Those boys are fantastic." End quote. Dead Man Down. Of course, you recognize Noomi Rapace from Prometheus, but after leaving the Alien franchise, Noomi Rapace reunited with Niels Arden Opla, the man who helmed the original Swedish The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo for Dead Man Down. In addition to Rapace, Dead Man Down also boasts a cast that includes Colin Farrell, Dominic Cooper, and Terrence Howard. Unfortunately, despite all that star power, the movie itself wasn't particularly well received by anyone. One critic at Variety called it revenge fantasy dreck and a derivative collection of brazen plot holes and late-night cable cliches. The Drop. Adapted by Dennis Lehane from his own short story Animal Rescue, The Drop is a quiet film noir about crime, vengeance, and decent men who do very bad things in the basements of Brooklyn bars. And for Noomi Rapace, it presented a serious challenge, namely having to hold her own on screen against not just Tom Hardy, who just becomes super famous after doing Inception and The Dark Knight Rises back-to-back, but also the world's most adorable pit bull puppy. Child 44. Perhaps thanks to her incredible chemistry with Tom Hardy in The Drop, Noomi Rapace turned up immediately in another movie with the British actor, this time as his wife in the Soviet-era thriller Child 44. In it, Hardy plays disgraced Stalin security officer Leo Demidov, who tries to track a serial killer against the wishes of his government. Though this film didn't get as much attention as some of Rapace's other projects thanks to a limited release in the US, everyone turned in solid performances that made for a tense, effective political thriller, even if everyone in it struggles occasionally with their Russian accents.
From the farthest reaches of outer space to the freezing tundra of the Antarctic, the Alien series has gone to some truly wild places. But if you're having trouble keeping track of all the xenomorphs, synthetics, and engineers, let this be your guide. The Alien franchise doesn't typically take place in the present, or even on Earth. Instead, the original Alien takes place in the year 2122. The crew members of the USS Nostromo live in a universe where the Earth is dying due to human interference, hence the Weyland-Yutani Corporation's desire to build better worlds. The sequel, Aliens, is set over 50 years later in 2179 after Ellen Ripley wakes up from her accidentally extended cryosleep. The third in the series, Alien 3, is set almost immediately afterward. After that, the timeline begins to get a bit tricky. The next installment of the original anthology, Alien Resurrection, stars a half-alien clone of Ripley and takes place in 2381, over 200 years after Alien 3. That's where the timeline ends, at least for now. From there, Ridley Scott's controversial prequel films, Prometheus and Alien Covenant, take place primarily in the years 2093 and 2104 respectively, just a few decades before the original Alien. Between the original series and its prequels, 2 crossover films were released that blended Aliens with the Predator movies. AVP, Alien vs. Predator, was released in 2004 and takes place that same year. Its follow-up, 2007's Aliens vs. Predator Requiem, takes place immediately after the first AVP. Needless to say, the Alien timeline is all over the place. Throughout the Alien franchise, we see a handful of different extraterrestrial creatures. From the original eggs and their face-hugging offspring, to the chest-bursters that grow into full-on xenomorphs, the life cycle of an alien is a fascinating thing. As it turns out though, there are plenty of other alien variants out there. Some of them are even deadlier than the classic version from 1979, even if the first Alien is the most iconic.
You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you?
perfect organism.
Everyone who's seen Aliens knows and loves the xenomorph queen, but there are even more variations than that. In Alien 3, a facehugger uses a dog or an ox as a host, resulting in a four-legged xenomorph called a runner. This creature is understandably a bit more primal than the traditional two-legged xenomorph. As a result, it hunts down the prisoners of Fiorina 161 before Ripley and her new companions are able to take it out. This becomes a recurring trend throughout the Alien sequels, as new variants of the iconic xenomorph begin to develop. By the time Alien Covenant rolls around, it's explained that many of these variations are due to genetic manipulation by the android David, who may be the one responsible for creating the aliens in the first place. By mixing a black liquid mutagen with different hosts and gene pools, David creates the genetic template for what would become known as the xenomorph. From there, the Alien franchise is born, and the horror continues. In the first Alien, Nostromo crew member Kane is infected by a facehugger while exploring a downed spacecraft on the moon of LV-426. Immediately following his exposure, he's taken back aboard the Nostromo, ignoring Ripley's very logical quarantine protocols, and operated on by the android Ash. Eventually, the facehugger detaches itself and dies, and Kane wakes up, seemingly back to normal. Except nothing would ever be normal again. In a shocking moment that audience members in 1979 certainly didn't see coming, the chestburster brutally tears its way out of Kane's ribcage. The tiny alien gets away, and it only takes a few hours before it's a full-fledged xenomorph. But how does it grow up so fast? The exact lifespan and life cycle of the titular alien creatures is something of a mystery. What we do know is that, immediately upon the chestburster's birth, it hides in a dark and isolated area to undergo its metamorphosis.
Does it grow? Yeah. Very rapidly.
By the time the creature is next seen on the Nostromo, its transformation is complete. The adult-sized alien drone is now smarter, scarier, and far deadlier. If the xenomorph is anything like life on Earth, then its quick evolution might be the catalyst for its murderous rampage. After all, such a fast transformation would require a whole lot of calories. Extraterrestrials aren't the only sci-fi beings to regularly show up in the Alien movies. No matter the installment, aside from the Alien vs. Predator spin-offs, a synthetic android manages to rear its human-like head and cause some commotion. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, but more often than not, they're integral to the plot and have some sort of hidden agenda. In the original Alien, the android Ash is an A2 model synthetic pretending to be human, and he's programmed to capture the xenomorph alive, even if that means killing his crewmates. Future sequels include a variety of synthetics with different capabilities. Bishop is heroic, Call is more emotionally advanced, and David does all sorts of fantastical things. Ash, on the other hand, didn't have much of a personality, or any personal investment beyond his orders from Weyland-Yutani. More than that, Ash was also defective. Like the other synthetics in his batch, he was prone to malfunction.
Was it an older model?
Yeah, the Hyperdyne system's 128.2.
Well, that explains it, and the U2s always were a bit twitchy.
Evidently, the bugs in Ash's model were dealt with in future models. Thankfully for Ripley, Bishop reveals that the synthetics made after the A2s have been fitted with behavioral inhibitor chips, meaning that they probably won't try to kill you with a magazine. Aliens didn't just add more xenomorphs to the mix. It also introduced audiences to the rough and rowdy crew of the USS Sulaco. One of the most beloved members of this crew is the android Bishop, who's played by the legendary actor Lance Henriksen. Despite Ripley's unfortunate experiences with the synthetic on the Nostromo, Bishop proves himself to be nothing short of heroic throughout the film. If it wasn't for him, then Ripley, Corporal Hicks, and Newt almost definitely wouldn't have made it out alive. This doesn't last, as Hicks and Newt are killed off in the opening minutes of Alien 3. Bishop survives to help Ripley one final time before being deactivated for good, but another Bishop soon takes his place. This version, designated Bishop 2 in the credits, isn't the heroic android from Aliens. He's here to capture Ripley and her alien spawn.
The company sent me here to show your friendly face, to demonstrate how important you are to us. To me.
To this day, it's unclear if this Bishop is actually human or yet another android. Henriksen told IGN they were leaving that open because they weren't sure what they were going to do with me. But what I saw was that it was a more advanced model, certainly. That's not the only Bishop duplicate out there, though. In the original AVP, Alien vs. Predator, Henriksen returns as a human being named Charles Bishop Weyland, one of the original founders of Weyland-Yutani back in the 21st century. There's no ambiguity here, though. We can see quite clearly that this Bishop is made of flesh and blood when he's brutalized by a predator. Apparently, Bishops can never seem to catch a break. For decades, fans have debated over which Alien movie is the greatest. Is it Ridley Scott's original, or is it James Cameron's sequel? While we couldn't possibly answer that impossible question, it's clear that David Fincher's Alien 3 is not the franchise's best. Even though Ripley, Hicks, Newt, and Bishop all survived the brutal invasion at the end of Aliens, their victory is short-lived as their vessel crashes into the prison world of Fiorina 161 in the third film's opening. This course correction is caused by a facehugger, which reportedly melted some of the ship's primary systems. Hicks and Newt are killed in the wreck, and Bishop is left beyond repair, leaving Ripley to fight off a new xenomorph without her companions.
Ripley.
Hi, Bishop. How are you feeling?
My legs hurt.
While she makes some new allies on Fiorina 161, none are as meaningful to her as Hicks and Newt, leaving Ripley broken over the loss of her surrogate family. If you hate the ending to Hicks' story as much as everyone else, there are a few unproduced drafts of Alien 3 out there that keep Newt, Hicks, and Bishop in the picture. The 2013 video game Aliens Colonial Marines even introduces a parallel history in which Hicks is saved before his death. It's explained that the body of the soldier who died in the threequel belonged to a different Marine who was forcibly inserted into his pod after Hicks was awakened. While the canonicity and quality of Colonial Marines is debatable, it certainly gives Hicks a more heroic send-off. On the subject of the controversial Alien 3, one of the most confusing moments is the introduction of the alien egg that ends up on board the USS Sulaco. Of course, we all know that the facehugger that hatched from this egg is responsible for the deaths of Newt and Hicks, but how did it manage to climb aboard the spacecraft in the first place? While there isn't a direct answer to this question in Aliens or Alien 3, there are a few theories that might shed some light on this apparent plot hole. The first is that the alien queen may have implanted an egg in the ship before being launched out of the airlock, but this seems a bit far-fetched given that the queen's egg sac was destroyed by Ripley. Even if the queen had laid an egg within the landing gear of the shuttle before revealing itself, it still doesn't explain how the egg got further inside the Sulaco, or anywhere near the cryosleep pods that house the 3 survivors. Another possible explanation comes from Aliens Colonial Marines, which explains that another ship sent by Weyland-Yutani intercepted the Sulaco while Ripley and her friends were in cryosleep. It's then that the Weyland-Yutani crew let in a facehugger from their own craft, where they'd been experimenting on xenomorphs, which leads directly into the events of Alien 3. One of the most hated films in the Alien chronology, Alien Resurrection, takes the Ripley saga a step further with cloning technology. Genetic experiments result in the creation of Ripley 8, a clone of the original protagonist who died over 200 years earlier, and she's a bit more alien than she might care to admit. Throughout the film, Ripley 8 is shown to be more aggressive, sarcastic, and considerably stronger than the original star of the franchise.
You're programmed to be an ass. You're the new ass model they're putting out? Come on.
It may seem like the new Ripley's updated personality came out of nowhere, but there's actually a good reason for that. Ripley 8, as her name suggests, is not the first clone of Ripley to be developed, but she was the most successful. Following Weyland-Yutani's shutdown, Ripley's genetic samples from the Fiorina 161 prison were collected by the United Systems military, which produced 7 defective Ripley hybrid clones before finding success the 8th time around. Due to the change in the original Ripley's DNA during the events of Alien 3, which include a new queen growing inside of her, Ripley 8 was grown from a different genetic template that includes xenomorph DNA. As a result, Ripley 8 received alien attributes as well as human ones, including more aggressive tendencies and superior physical strength. In Alien Resurrection, the Ripley clones are created for one specific purpose: to finally create a perfect alien queen. This would provide the United Systems military with the genetic material necessary to breed xenomorphs built for war. While this doesn't go as planned for the crew of the USM Ariga, which is completely wiped out by the film's end, the program itself succeeds in producing the first living alien-human hybrids. Ripley 8 is counted among them, given her shared alien DNA and connection to the hive mind, as well as the cloned alien queen itself. By the end of the film, the queen even births a creature called a newborn that has some human features. A perfect alien-human hybrid, the newborn kills its alien mother before bonding with Ripley 8 in one of the strangest scenes in the history of the franchise. As it turns out, the newborn sees the cloned Ripley as its true mother due to their shared DNA, so it kills the queen to protect her. Sadly, the newborn quickly proves itself a threat to humanity and synthetics alike, just like its other alien siblings. In the climax of Resurrection, Ripley 8 is forced to kill it the way she knows best, by ejecting it out into deep space. All she can do is shed a tear for the tortured creature, which is admittedly more than any of us can do. Even more tragic than that though, this is the last we ever see of Ripley. After Alien Resurrection, the Alien franchise shifted into its Alien vs. Predator phase, with plans for a 5th film falling through. That is, until Scott returned with his 2012 prequel, Prometheus. This was the first of 2 Scott-helmed prequel pictures that take place decades before the events of his original Alien. Despite the obvious connections though, Prometheus doesn't exactly commit to being a prequel. Instead, it features some inconsistencies that have made some fans theorize that it might be a sort of prequel reboot hybrid instead, not unlike the recent Planet of the Apes trilogy. The world visited in Alien and Aliens is designated LV-426 and features the derelict spacecraft that houses the alien eggs, but Prometheus takes place on a more breathable world called LV-223. Likewise, the downed craft seen in Prometheus doesn't house any eggs, just plenty of black goo. Another change can be seen in the differences between the so-called space jockey in Alien and the dead engineer in Prometheus. There are even moments in Alien Covenant that seem to contradict Cameron's Aliens, including the idea that massive hordes of xenomorphs could be created without a queen. Plus, the technology of the prequel films seems much more advanced compared to the retro-futuristic aesthetic of the originals. One of the biggest mysteries in the Alien franchise comes from Prometheus, which follows a group of explorers as they search for the origins of life in the universe. During their mission, crew member Meredith Vickers is revealed to be the daughter of Weyland-Yutani founder Peter Weyland. Of course, given her often cold and logical nature, the question of her humanity has been asked time and time again, including in the film itself.
I was wondering, are you a robot?
It's definitely a possibility. Vickers never bleeds during the film, and since she's crushed by the engineer's juggernaut craft, we never learn whether her blood runs red or white. Vickers also doesn't seem to care much when her father is killed, and the synthetic David refers to the elderly billionaire as his father as well. While the film leaves this question unresolved, screenwriter Damon Lindelof was pretty clear when he stated that Vickers is made of flesh and bone. Despite having a daughter of his own, Peter Weyland made David to be the son that he never had. Lindelof joked to MTV, "What better way to piss off your daughter than to build the male equivalent of her?" Prometheus reveals a pretty intense truth to its characters. All known life in the universe, including humanity, was created by an alien race called the Engineers. The film dives into the philosophical implications of such a discovery as the Prometheus crew follows the ancient star map that leads them to LV-223.
So you're saying we're here because of a map you two kids found in a cave, is that right?
No.
Yeah.
On this moon, the crew learns that the Engineers, or at least the one they've encountered, hope to wipe out humanity by releasing their powerful black goo upon the planet. Thankfully, Elizabeth Shaw and her companions are able to prevent the apocalypse, but not without casualties. As for why the Engineers turned on their creation, the truth is that we don't know. It's possible that they were frustrated with the constant war and violence among humans, or maybe they wanted to use the black goo to make a new world by starting everything over again. Either way, Prometheus never explains their frustrations, and its sequel Alien Covenant doesn't do this plotline any favors either. We also don't learn how the Engineer civilization fell before the events of Prometheus. Ruins and an abandoned facility are clearly shown, but we don't know much more than that. While we've never gotten a direct answer in the films, and likely never will, Alien Covenant raises the possibility that the Engineers on LV-223 were destroyed by their own creations. At the end of Prometheus, David and Shaw embark on a new journey to take the fight to the Engineers and discover why they want to wipe out humanity. With a hopeful ending, it seemed like these two companions could headline an entire trilogy themselves, starting a new saga in the Alien universe. When Scott's follow-up Alien Covenant was released though, all those hopes and dreams died. When we catch up with David, he explains that Shaw died years prior. What he fails to mention is that he killed the entire Engineer population on Planet 4, which Shaw opposed, calling it genocide. Because she turned on him, David used Shaw as an incubator for his biological experiments both before and after she died. Ultimately, he created a proto-xenomorph that serves as the ultimate terror of the film. While we don't see much of Shaw in Covenant, Scott's short film The Crossing takes place in the time between prequels, explaining how Shaw cared for David and rebuilt his body before he betrayed her. Although Shaw never sees her mission realized, David's endgame is only beginning as the android strives to create the perfect monster. With more questions than answers, we can only hope to learn more in further installments.
What do you believe in, David?
Creation.
The overall Alien canon, like other big sci-fi franchises, is always up for debate. Even though AVP, Alien vs. Predator, and Aliens vs. Predator Requiem came out long before Scott's prequels, they were quickly retconned following the release of Prometheus. While mainline Predator installments like Predator 2 have referenced the Alien franchise, the world of the Xenomorphs rarely reciprocates. It's exciting to bring together these powerhouse franchises, but given the glaring plot holes, the AVP movies no longer fit into the Alien lore. One such plot hole is the revelation that the Xenomorphs have been on Earth for centuries and are locked in eternal combat with the Predators. Beyond that, AVP Weyland-Yutani co-founder Charles Bishop Weyland contradicts the reveal of Peter Weyland from Prometheus, as does the hyper-quick development of Xenomorphs from their human hosts to fully grown aliens in a matter of minutes. Regardless though, the Xenomorph-Predator battle sequences are pretty spectacular. Ultimately, the best way to understand the AVP films is as their own separate continuity. While the events of AVP fit in nicely with the Predator franchise, they don't quite work in the expanded world of Alien.
The cold isolation of space, nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Aliens stalk the halls with only one thing on their minds: expand and consume. Keep watching to see how each Alien movie connects to one another. In the late 1970s, H.R. Giger designed a new horrific movie monster, the xenomorph. It became iconic for its lethal serrated tail, its flesh-tearing proboscis, and acidic blood that could burn through the hull of a spaceship. Director Ridley Scott took Giger's creature and placed it inside the Nostromo, a futuristic yet claustrophobic spaceship that becomes little more than a tomb for the xenomorph's many victims. Upon its 1979 premiere, Alien cemented itself as a sci-fi horror phenomenon, with Sigourney Weaver's Ellen Ripley enduring as one of the most iconic protagonists in cinematic history. In the years since, the Alien universe has developed a massive legacy steeped in expansive lore.
I think they want us to come and find them.
While Prometheus was also helmed by Scott, this prequel was a markedly different experience than the original movie. The film follows Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, played by Noomi Rapace, and Dr. Charlie Holloway, portrayed by Logan Marshall Green, as they try to answer humanity's big question: where do we come from? The two archaeologists discover evidence across multiple cultures and time periods suggesting that humans worshipped giant mysterious beings. This evidence also suggests an unknown importance surrounding the distant moon, LV-223. Funded by the Wayland Corporation, the pair embark on a 2-year journey into space aboard the starship Prometheus. The crew is eventually awakened from stasis by the android David, played by Michael Fassbender. Upon landing, they discover impressive technology years beyond humanity, along with vases of dark, unidentified goo. While studying what they found, several crew members are attacked and infected by alien life forms. Simultaneously, David experiments on other crew members using the newfound goo. But the real kicker comes from the head of one of those large humanoid beings depicted on Earth. The species is given the moniker the Engineers. After Doctors Holloway and Shaw are intimate with one another, they come to realize Holloway is infected with an alien contagion, leading to his premature death at the hands of the crew. Still reeling from Holloway's demise, the crew soon discovers they've been transporting the withered Peter Wayland, played by Guy Pearce, so that he could discover the key to immortality. To this end, Wayland and David locate a living engineer in stasis and awaken it. While Wayland is convinced the engineer species were the original creators of humanity and his source of salvation, the engineer ultimately kills him, decapitates David, and is hell-bent on tracking down the remaining crew. Dr. Shaw learns that she is pregnant with an alien life form and manages to extract the octopus-like creature from her abdomen. Through this, she deduces that the goo found on the moon was created by the engineers to wipe out humanity. After Shaw bests the engineer, she takes David's still active head and commandeers a ship to find the engineer's homeworld. As Prometheus concludes, the octopus-like monster which Shaw had unleashed on the engineer to provide her escape is revealed to be a proto-facehugger. It implants the engineer with a chest-bursting embryo similar to the xenomorphs, setting the stage for the rest of the franchise.
They are a dying species grasping for resurrection. They don't deserve to start again, and I'm not going to let them.
Nearly 11 years after the events of Prometheus, a solar flare damages the colonization ship Covenant while it's en route to its designated planet. The android Walter, played by Michael Fassbender, awakens the emergency crew, only to have their captain perish due to a technical malfunction. Upon repairing the ship, the Covenant crew receives a mysterious transmission, which they trace back to a nearby planet. This setup kicks off 2017's Alien Covenant, Scott's second prequel. The acting captain Christopher Oram, played by Billy Crudup, decides to settle on this new planet instead. While receiving pushback from Chief Catherine Daniels, portrayed by Catherine Waterston, Oram steers the Covenant towards the signal. They discover the engineer ship, which Dr. Shaw had stolen in the final act of Prometheus, and after trekking through the planet's wilderness, 2 of the crew are infected by airborne spores. The spores gestate into the newly dubbed neomorphs, which quickly grow into adulthood and attack the crew. Amid the chaos, the Prometheus android David comes to their rescue. While the crew is initially trusting, they realize David has grown a god complex through his years in isolation. It's revealed that he killed Dr. Shaw to experiment on her and systematically wiped the engineer species from their homeworld using the bioagent that had been developed to kill humanity. Not only that, but David was the one who engineered the genetic makeup of what would become the xenomorph. As Oram is infected by a facehugger, the remaining crew make moves to immediately leave the planet. But when David destroys Walter and boards the Covenant posing as him, he's followed by 2 xenomorphs, who resume terrorizing the crew. After the xenomorphs are destroyed, the remaining crew enter hypersleep to continue their journey to their original destination. But as Catherine enters her pod, she realizes in horror that David has replaced Walter and is now in control of the ship. While she falls into stasis, we see David placing the xenomorph embryos in cold storage, setting up some of the groundwork for the original 1979 film.
This is Ripley, last survivor of the Nostromo. Signing off.
Alien takes place 17 years after Alien Covenant. In the original landmark flick, we are introduced to the crew of the Nostromo as they come across a wayward distress signal. Captain Dallas, played by Tom Skerritt, decides to investigate, and the crew discovers an alien ship bearing a dead engineer and several alien eggs. After a facehugger emerges and attaches itself to Kane, portrayed by John Hurt, they break quarantine procedures and bring their affected teammate back on board the Nostromo. While the film chronology confirms this as an engineer ship, the fact that the android David was the final designer of the xenomorph species leads to narrative inconsistencies. For the time between the end of Alien Covenant and the start of the original movie, there are no explanations as to how another engineer ship came to contain a species that wasn't created by them. With an Alien TV series reportedly on the way and Ridley Scott indicating another film is in the works, it's possible the gap will be bridged in future installments. While the crew fails to safely remove the facehugger from Kane, it implants a xenomorph embryo down his gullet. After he wakes and joins his shipmates for a meal, the hidden parasite bursts from his chest cavity, shocking the rest of the crew before scurrying off. As they hunt for the creature, it grows rapidly and starts picking off members of the team one by one. The science officer Ash, played by Ian Holm, is discovered to be an android tasked with the preservation of the xenomorph for further study, regardless of the human passenger's safety. After Ripley sets the ship to self-destruct and flees in an escape pod, she has one final showdown with the xenomorph, which ends in her blasting it into space using the pod's exhaust. From there, she sets a course for Earth and falls back into hypersleep. Alien's major conflict has less to do with the deadly alien aboard the Nostromo and more to do with a shadowy corporation using whatever means to achieve their goals. However, exactly how the Weyland Corporation discovered the xenomorph's location prior to our main cast finding the derelict ship remains a mystery.
Ma'am, I already said that it was not indigenous. It was a derelict spacecraft. It was an alien ship. It was not from there.
At the start of James Cameron's sequel Aliens, Ripley wakes up on a space station orbiting Earth after 57 years in stasis. She is debriefed by the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, who objectively dismiss her explanation of what happened in the previous movie. However, the Weyland-Yutani representative Carter Burke, played by Paul Reiser, informs Ripley that they lost contact with the terraforming colony, at least hope. He convinces her to join a mission in which they will determine the colony's fate, as well as destroy any alien species alive on the planet. Upon their arrival, the colonial marines discover a young girl named Newt, portrayed by Carrie Henn, and the rest of the population cocooned in unrecognizable goo. With chest bursters popping from these trapped victims and adult aliens attacking the team, Ripley realizes that the xenomorphs are using humans as incubators. As attacks continue, the question becomes, how are the eggs being created? Ripley soon uncovers how Burke had ordered the colonists to investigate the derelict engineer ship still in orbit so that Weyland-Yutani could use the species for weapons research. Ultimately, Ripley, Newt the android bishop, played by Lance Henriksen, and Corporal Hicks, played by Michael Biehn, are the only survivors. The aliens target Newt after she is separated from Ripley, who then pursues them into the heart of their hive and finds a xenomorph queen. After reclaiming Newt and escaping the queen, they board a ship to leave the planetoid behind. But the queen manages to get aboard. Ripley battles the monster via a mechanical exosuit and forces it out of an airlock. The survivors then enter hypersleep for a trip back to Earth and credits roll.
This is Ripley, last survivor of the Nostromo. Signing off.
David Fincher's 1992 film Alien 3 begins directly after the events of the previous installment. A mysterious fire on Ripley's ship forces a computer to launch its escape pods onto the planet Fiorina 161. After Ripley is recovered by Dr. Clemens, played by Charles Dance, she is brought to an all-male maximum security prison. She learns that Newt and Hicks were killed in the spaceship crash, while also being informed that a message was sent to Weyland-Yutani for them to come and collect her. Uncertain of what caused the fire on her ship, Ripley convinces Clemens to autopsy Newt's body. However, when a prison inmate dies under strange circumstances, she suspects that another xenomorph managed to board her ship and is now loose in the prison. When Ripley finds and reactivates Bishop, he confirms her fears of a rogue xenomorph just as it ramps up its attacks on inmates. But since the prison lacks any kind of weapon stockpile, the remaining prisoners must lure the alien into a death trap. As they work to put their plan into motion, Ripley finds out that she is the current incubator for a new xenomorph queen. She realizes she must kill herself, but not before helping the prison crew stop the alien. Knowing it won't hurt her because she's pregnant, Ripley and the remaining crew corner the alien, dump molten lead on it, cool it with the emergency sprinkler system, and shatter the creature to pieces. Upon their victory, however, Weyland-Yutani arrives. They try to convince Ripley that they can safely remove the gestating queen from her body, but she doesn't buy it for an instant. She jumps into a massive blast furnace, killing herself and the queen. Or so it seemed. Jean-Pierre Jeunet's 1997 follow-up Alien Resurrection depicts the final chronological events in the Alien film Saga, especially since Ridley Scott declared the Alien vs. Predator movies non-canonical. This installment, originally penned by Joss Whedon, takes a Jurassic World approach to its story. It depicts the United System's ill-advised attempt to clone the xenomorphs some 200 years after the events of Alien 3. Utilizing Ripley's DNA, the USM creates clones of her with the alien queen embryo still inside. Following 7 unsuccessful attempts, they finally create Ripley 8, who possesses the original Ellen Ripley's genetic memories. Additionally, since her DNA was grafted with that of the xenomorph queen, the queen also shares the same genetic knowledge as her host, making them both partial hybrids of each other. When a ragtag mercenary ship called the Betty arrives and delivers humans to serve as hosts for alien embryos, you can almost hear Ian Malcolm's voice in Jurassic Park stammering that life will find a way. While these human sacrifices do indeed produce aliens, the newer spawns use their new genetic knowledge to break free of their containment. The aliens proceed to attack the remaining soldiers left on board, and after a burst of bloody mayhem, only a few survivors remain. By this point, Ripley 8 has discovered her own superhuman strength and acidic blood. In the meantime, the survivors find out that the station is on autopilot and heading for Earth. Seeing the looming catastrophe in front of them, the team moves to escape via the Betty and destroy the USM station. But before they can all get to their life raft, Ripley 8 is abducted by a xenomorph and taken back to the hive. It's revealed to her that the alien queen has evolved to possess a human-like reproductive system, and she gives birth to a fully fledged human-alien hybrid. When Ripley 8 manages to escape the xenomorph swarm and boards the Betty with the rest of the crew, an open hatch prevents them from leaving. As they move to fix the issue, the human-alien hybrid attacks. Ripley 8 stops the creature by using its genetic trust in her against it. While hugging the hybrid, she creates a hole in a nearby window using her acidic blood, which violently sucks the creature into space. The movie concludes with the remaining crew arriving on Earth, optimistic for a future without the threat of a xenomorph apocalypse. Well, at least for now.